Welcome to Buffalo Rumblings Live. My name is Matt Warren. I am joined today by Tim Graham of the Buffalo News. Tim, we've been reading a lot of your stuff recently about the sale process of the Buffalo Bills. How you doing?
I'm doing good. Most of that stuff hasn't been made up, so I'm pretty proud of it.
Yeah, we hope you're not making up too much news. Even though there's contradictory reports coming left and right, that's certainly not your fault or anybody else who's reporting on its fault, probably. So just kind of tell us where we stand right now in the Bills sale process in general. Not necessarily specific bidders, but what's going on in the sale process right now?
Well, right now the trust is holding face-to-face presentations with the bidders, and they have as many as 8 of these meetings scheduled. 2 were last week, and the first one was with Donald Trump, of course, and then the second one was with Jeffrey Gundlach and Jim and Dan Kelly. Those were in Detroit. This week there are 4 scheduled in New York City, and then next week there might be 2 more. So that's where it's up to 8, between 5 and 8, because we had the 4 bidders, of course, that we know about: Donald Trump, Terry Pagula, the Bon Jovi/Toronto group, Tom Golisano, plus the Jim Kelly, Jeffrey Gundlach meeting. And then 3 more meetings or times have been carved out in addition to that. Now, of course, the Gundlach, Jim Kelly meeting turned out to be them asking to be paired with another group. I don't believe that the other 3 remaining meetings that we don't really know who are slotted in there, that those are similar situations where it's going to be people asking for minority type stuff. I'm led to believe that there are actual other possible bidders out there, even if they haven't submitted that initial bid yet. I reported on Friday that the Pritzker family, which is 11 billionaires are in this family. It's the Hyatt hotel fortune. That they have some degree of interest in the Buffalo Bills, and they were brought in. Their interest was piqued by Nick Sinatra, the local developer. Their interest now is considered lukewarm, but Morgan Stanley has been trying to coax all kinds of action because it's been limited. It's been a bit disappointing for the trust, for Morgan Stanley. And so they're going back to the drawing board, or at least they did on July 29th when those 3 bids came in, and they've been trying to get some of those people who were maybe on the fence or lukewarm in the past, trying to motivate them to come forward. So that's why when it comes to how many meetings there are going to be, how many of these face-to-face meetings, we really don't know. But we do also know that non-disclosure agreements have been signed additional to over the past couple of weeks. So that comes from Morgan Stanley trying to, as I keep saying, generate more action. And so as long as these non-disclosures are being signed and people are sniffing around, who knows who these other bidders might be.
You mentioned that the number of bids was relatively low. People expected this to be kind of a hot commodity. Forbes' Mike Ozanian actually called it a 3-ring circus because Morgan Stanley has been so inexperienced in this type of transaction. What kind of stuff are you hearing either behind the scenes or kind of right up front that would lead you to either agree or disagree with that Forbes opinion?
Well, I have talked to some people in the sports brokerage industry, not people who are directly involved with these sales, but who have in the past bought or sold teams, and they were surprised when the Bills Trust selected Morgan Stanley because of their inexperience in these types of sales. Now, they have had some transactions in the past regarding sports, but they thought that it was a bizarre choice, but obviously Morgan Stanley highly respected, so everybody kind of gave Morgan Stanley the benefit of the doubt. There were reports very early in the process of Donald Trump saying that the NFL should take over. This was even before the bids. We're talking maybe even a month and a half ago, that Roger Goodell should step in and have the league oversee the sale because that was a bit of a red flag right there. But so I've had people around, around the periphery saying it was a peculiar choice. And then the non-disclosure agreements came to light, and about 60 of them went out, and only about 20 of them have been returned. And by that July 29th meeting, I think it was in the 16 to 18 range. There have been a couple of them have been returned since. So the non-disclosure agreement, to have so many people interested in the beginning and then get the non-disclosure agreement and say, I'm not even going to sign this thing. There was a lot of criticism that the non-disclosure agreements were too strict, that it limited a lot of the flexibility for owners or for bidders moving forward. For instance, under certain or other circumstances, bidders, let's say the Pagula Group and that's a bad example because that would never happen. Let's say the Golisano and the Trump Group wanted to merge at some point. Under terms of the non-disclosure agreement, they cannot. And so there were a lot of groups that looked at this and said, I don't want to sign this because I'm tying my hands behind my back and I'm losing my flexibility because I want to be able to maybe partner up with somebody else down the road. And then there was another clause in this non-disclosure agreement that prevented you actually from speaking to a bank. So let's say you were interested in buying the bills and had $800 million and you wanted to get a loan for $200 million. Technically, by terms of this non-disclosure agreement, you couldn't then go to the bank and explain to them what you wanted the loan for. So, I mean, a lot of people looked at it and thought, what is this? And of course, the trust signs off on this non-disclosure agreement. Morgan Stanley isn't alone in this, but it's been a situation where people who would ordinarily or may have been interested otherwise have been deterred at different points, and a lot of that can be blamed on the process.
Well, I wrote a check for $1.5 billion to Mary Wilson.
I saw that. It was impressive. That was putting your money where your mouth was. And
I didn't have to talk to any banks. Brian Galford gave me a couple bucks, and we took care of it. I really find it so interesting about the groups not being able to talk to each other. And specifically, if Jim Kelly and Gunlock were able to go into that meeting and say, hey, we want to be paired with someone else, they have to go through the trust to do that. And how come other folks didn't necessarily do that if you're saying that was an option?
Well, I don't know. And I think that this is also, and this was maybe one of the best examples of why Morgan Stanley has not looked good throughout this process. The rules have been made up as we've gone along, and even the rules that were set forth have been ignored. Tom Golisano just thumbed his nose at that July 29th deadline and said, I'm going to submit my non-disclosure or my non-binding bid whenever I damn well please. And there really was nothing Morgan Stanley could do about it because they were in a position, they needed the bids, they need the action. And so when Tom Golisano submitted his bid, they said, well, of course we'll take this. It's 10 days late, but we have no choice. And so I think there were a lot of things in there involved in the process where people are doing as they please. And it hasn't been, that July 29th deadline in and of itself might have been a mistake because it obviously was not a real deadline. And if they were going to end up trying to still generate an action 2 weeks later, then maybe they should have made the deadline later, as opposed to doing it early and maybe some groups weren't able to get their stuff together by that point and just decided, well, we're not going to meet this deadline. Let's just forget about it. Well, now they've had until now we're into second week of August, and people are still seem to be getting their stuff together. So it's just been it's been a bit, I think, chaotic for a lot of businessmen's taste.
Yeah, and I mean, you probably are more familiar with this than me, but you're right. It seems chaotic. I don't know how many multi-billion-dollar sales go like very organized step by step, and they have these very strict deadlines and things like that. It wouldn't seem to be normal to me because these guys, I would imagine, don't like being surprised. But is this kind of, I don't know, you said make it up as you go along kind of thing. Is that kind of thing normal in stuff like this?
Well, I don't know that there really is a template for selling a sports team. There are different things that happen along the way. For instance, the last team to sell, the Cleveland Browns, I happened to be at covering the Pro Football Hall of Fame induction ceremony 2 years ago. I'm driving. I'm in Ohio listening to the Cleveland sports radio station, and they said, hey, guess what? The Browns were just sold. Nobody even knew they were for sale. And so everything's been different. And the Bills have, I don't want to say unique because this has happened in the past, but it hasn't happened too often where an owner has died and the team has been put up for sale, in which it's been totally advertised and everyone knew the team was for sale, and that there was no situation where, like for instance with the St. Louis Rams and Georgia Franieri, where there was a minority buyer that came up and was able to buy the rest of it, or if there was a family situation. This hasn't happened in a long time, and I'm taking a stab at it. Maybe when Joe Robbie died with the Miami Dolphins, and his family didn't want to keep the team, and Wayne Huizenga bought him. I don't know. I'd have to go back and look. But this type of sale has been unusual in the NFL. They usually are sold by a living owner, or it is a situation, maybe the Pittsburgh Steelers, where it was a restructuring and they brought in a bunch of minority investors. The Jacksonville Jaguars had a living owner sell the team to Shad Khan. The Miami Dolphins had a living owner when Wayne Huizenga sold to Stephen Ross.
Mm-hmm.
It's
but
been.
He was a minority owner too, right? And so he just kind of moved up in the ownership stakes things.
Well, yeah, but it hasn't been, this type of sale hasn't taken place, and so to say what is usual, what's common, it's hard to say.
Okay.
But I do know that there have been a lot of observers of this who are educated and who have either bought or sold teams in the past that look at this and shake their heads, because it just hasn't gone according to, if there is a Hoyle on this, it hasn't gone according to what in their minds it should go.
Well, for us as Buffalo Bills fans, I don't know as if that's going to matter a whole lot. One of our users, Griff, asks, on what you've been hearing, is it safe to say that Pegula is a foregone conclusion? And I asked him to rephrase it, because if it was, we'd have a really short hangout here tonight. But if you put a percentage on it, what are Pegula's chances of winning this franchise, keeping them in Buffalo for the long term?
Well, see, here's the thing. My prediction for a couple of months has been that Terry Pegula is going to be the next owner of the Bills. I'm not changing that prediction. I think especially when those 3 bids came in at first, even though we didn't know the actual numbers, and the reporting on those numbers has been crazy and way off, and you didn't see me report any numbers because those were crazy figures, and they weren't even close to the truth. But at that time, I thought that Pegula looked like he had a stranglehold on things, and I still think he does. My only concern from a Pegula standpoint is these 8 meetings that are scheduled, and who are these other meetings with? Now, probably they are with people who at some point had cold feet or who weren't interested. So that is why I still think Pegula's in the driver's seat here, because whoever Morgan Stanley has been scaring up for these additional meetings or to drum up this interest, I think it's half-hearted interest, or maybe who knows? Maybe they're able to convince somebody with a lot of money to take a chance. And so until it's done, you never know for sure. And I would rather know who all the players were in this before I could tell you yes for sure Terry Pegula is going to be the next owner of the team. But I think as it stands now with the bidders that we know, he's clearly in front of all of them. And I think it would be a big surprise if somebody were to come out of the closet. And, well, that's a terrible phrase for me to use. Let's say for somebody to come from behind the curtain and say, hey, I happen to have $1.5 billion and I want to buy a football team.
Yeah, and based on some of the numbers that we've been hearing reported about the profits that the Bills make, it's not necessarily the greatest financial return for your $1 billion and change investment to get $30 million a year. I know we're throwing around money, but
right.
It just doesn't seem like, it seems like someone's going to have to want to buy a football team, like you said, and so if they do have that half-hearted interest, it's going to be a little bit more difficult. Gino Perilli, one of our readers, asked, what what about Pagula, or even, well, Golisano might be more willing to do this, but what's your opinion about whether Pagula or someone else would consider a partner or co-owner?
Well, I think that the way the NFL has and Morgan Stanley has declared its preference in regard to how things are going to go, the more people you have involved, the worse it can be for you, because you could get hung up on any number of different variables. The more people who are involved, the more somebody might might have a disagreement with how you proceeding with the bid, might have second thoughts, might not get through the vetting process. So I think the NFL and Morgan Stanley's preference has been single owner, and this has been another strike against the Bon Jovi group, and it's kind of a part of the reason that they've been falling apart a little bit over the last couple of weeks. The NFL prefers a single buyer, and so I think that if somebody wanted to bring on a partner, the best way to do it would be to buy the team, and then after you've bought the team, sell off some shares. Get it. And so Pagula could, I think, at some point do that. I think Golisano has talked about doing that with Scott Conjal and maybe some other people. I don't know, but that's kind of his plan, and that's been made known, is that Golisano knows, do it by yourself. That's your best chance to get the team, and then you can parse it off later.
Okay. Actually, you just answered the question I was going to about the. No, actually, you didn't. Okay. So you said that the multiple owners was maybe one of the complications that Morgan Stanley was facing. Do you think that there is a clause, and I want to make sure I get the right guy who asked this question, but is there a clause that would keep the team in Buffalo, something that's so strong that it might drive away other potential bidders?
I'm told that that's not the case, and that Ralph Wilson left no specific language in his will. Well, we've actually gotten a copy of the will, and the will was pretty vague, didn't tell us a lot. So everything then gets steered towards any directives that were given within the trust, the way the trust was structured. And we've been told all along from people who know how the trust is structured that that is not the case, that it is almost a borderline free-for-all. But there are different layers to this. And the NFL wants the Bills to stay in Western New York. Now, of course, we've heard a lot of talk about the caveat that they need a new stadium and all of that type of stuff. But I think that it's a situation where enough important people are going to make sure that the Bills stay in Western New York, that when some parties, some interested parties, were taking a look at the Bills to begin with, they looked at it and said, "Oh, this isn't for us, because we would like to move a team to Los Angeles or wherever." Probably Los Angeles really is the only. Los Angeles, Toronto, London. That's not going to happen with the Bills anyway. But I think there were Los Angeles groups looking into buying the Bills, and got to a certain point where they realized that the mood just wasn't right, that they were going to be facing an uphill battle for that, and so they decided it wasn't worth their trouble. But to answer the question, I don't think, and based on everything that I've heard, that there is anything specific that says the Bills must stay in Western New York as far as the trust is concerned.
That question came from user Singa. I found it while Tim was talking. We're joined by Tim Graham of the Buffalo News tonight, who's been breaking story after story about the Buffalo Bills sale process. So let's talk about some of the other guys. We've mentioned Pagula and even a little bit about Golisano. You mentioned that the Bon Jovi group was kind of fracturing. Do you see any way that after you talk about Morgan Stanley doing some missteps, the Bon Jovi group has certainly had their share? Is there any way that those guys can come out owning this team at the end of this process with all of the stuff that's gone on with that group?
Yes, there is a way, and it would come from money. And if they offer the most money, and they can dig their way out of this PR hole that they've dug for themselves, then yeah, I think there is a chance. There's still a chance. As long as they're alive, they still have a shot. But there are so many things stacked against them. Reputation, obviously, it's going to be a hard sell. It's way too late for the Bon Jovi group to overcome the credibility issues The letter obviously didn't help. In fact, it backfired. And there are too many holes in that letter, and it seemed almost, if you wanted to take this stand, as I'm sure a large majority of Bills fans did, it read like an excuse in advance, almost like terms that need to be met. And if this doesn't happen, then all bets are off. And if this doesn't happen, all bets are off. And if this doesn't, so we're committed to the fans, and we're going to be loyal to you. But if there's no new stadium in 5 years, they could look at it and say, hey, we said we needed a new stadium, or it could turn out to be a self-fulfilling prophecy, which I think this is where it could be dangerous for Bills fans with their hatred of Bon Jovi, which on some level is amusing, and on another level is justified. But let's say, just for the sake of discussion, that the Bon Jovi group does get the team. Of course, everyone probably is going to turn their back on that ownership group because there are too many people involved in it who have stated their intentions to hopefully bring a team to Toronto someday. This is even while Ralph Wilson was still alive. The Rogers Group, and of course Tim Lewicki, who is the CEO of Maple Leaf Sports Entertainment. That was pretty much his directive when he was hired, was to bring the NFL to Toronto. So you have a situation where the fans would obviously turn their back on them, probably not buy nearly as many season tickets or go to the game. We're talking about rows and rows of empty seats, and who knows? I've talked to some people who are close to the team that fear things like vandalism or safety issues. Could Bon Jovi even attend the games? Things like that. And if after 3 or 4 years of that, you look at it, if you're that Bon Jovi group, and say, look, we can't make this work. We have to leave. And so that's where the self-fulfilling prophecy may come in for the Toronto group, is that things are so bad here. We tried to make it work. We said we were going to make it work, and here it is. There's no climate here or any motivation for anybody to want to build us a new stadium. We can't even we can't even sell our games. People hate us. It's time for us to move to Toronto. And the NFL and the other owners would probably look at it and say, you know what, you're right. It's an untenable situation in Western New York. But I also know that the NFL is aware of all those issues I just said, safety issues, all this stuff. I mean, they know it's going to be a hard sell. And so that is why this is my personal opinion on this, that the Bon Jovi group is being brought along in this process to help drive up the price for Terry Pegula, number one. And number two, I don't think John Bon Jovi wants to be viewed as a quitter, even though the wheels are falling off this group to a certain extent. He fancies himself an NFL owner someday. Maybe it happens with the Denver Broncos. Pat Bowlen is having health issues and has stepped down. Maybe that team goes up for sale at some point. Maybe the St. Louis Rams or whomever. I don't know what. Maybe St. Louis. Maybe who knows what. I'm throwing a team out there. Denver seems like it might be the next one on the market. Maybe he ends up the owner of the Denver Broncos. He doesn't want to go through this process and, I don't want to say get blackballed, but be looked down upon by the other owners of, hey, what did you do? You quit on your bid. At least go through the process, because a lot of owners in the past have come from finishing as a runner-up in other team sales. That's where Shad Khan came from. He tried to buy the St. Louis Rams, came in second to Stan Kroenke. He ends up buying the Jacksonville Jaguars. Jimmy Haslam was a minority owner of the Pittsburgh Steelers before he bought the Cleveland Browns. It happens a lot. So I think that's where I think it's it's become more of a phony type group for me moving forward, because it just doesn't on paper seem like it's going to work. But it does serve a purpose for Morgan Stanley and for the NFL to help drive up the price of the team. So it's leverage right now is what it is.
Right, and John Crick of the Toronto Sun reported that they did, in fact, move on to the finalist process after several non-binding bids were rejected, whatever that means, as far as the sale process goes. Do you see a way that John Bon Jovi isn't the lead bidder or the lead owner candidate in that bid? Because he has to own at least 30% of the team, which means if the team goes for $1 billion, he's got to put at least $300 million into it, which is 60% of his net worth or something like that. Do you see them reconstituting themselves in a different way, where with a different money guy kind of being the face of, well, not necessarily the face, he'd still be the face, and the hair, of course, but do you see somebody else? And the leather pants. Do you see somebody else being the lead money guy in that group, kind of a reconstitution?
I think it could happen, and that's a great wrinkle, Matt, that you bring up there. A great question, but I don't think it's going to happen. Everybody I've spoken to has said that John Bon Jovi wants to be the principal owner and nothing else. And this is from people who are tight with John Bon Jovi and have told me this. The belief there is that being a minority owner is no fun. You get none of the glory, and you put up your money, and yes, you get a check every now and then, but you don't get to make any of the decisions. And so he's in this because he wants to be an NFL owner, not because he wants to be a part of an ownership team. So there does come a certain threshold where his group, given that, if he stays in that situation, there comes a certain threshold where that group can no longer compete. So what are really the alternatives there? Can Rogers Communications or Maple Leaf Sports Entertainment look at it and say, hey, John, look, sorry, man, we're going to have to dump you and go all on our own? Well, sure, it could happen, but then there's no way that consortium could win a bid for the Bills because of the toxicity of what Toronto means, or moving the team to Toronto. Those are the guys that are dragging Bon Jovi down. It's not the other way around. So could Bon Jovi at this point drop those guys and go find some other big money backers to help him? Theoretically, but he still needs to come up with 30%. Right. And it's probably too late in the game for him to, lose that, that stigma that comes with those Toronto partners. So I think really it's one of those situations where these guys are stuck together right now through this, and they maybe are going to be buying another team somewhere down the line. But right now, but that's a great point you mentioned. If Bon Jovi though decides that I will take less of a stake in the team and let Ed Rogers or Larry Tannenbaum take the lead in terms of finances, then I think they have a better shot, because then their ability to spend more increases. But that specter of Toronto then gets larger, and the credibility issues get worse. And so it's a delicate situation for that group, and I think that they overestimated or maybe underestimated the stigma that they would carry with them throughout this process regarding Toronto and what how that would turn off the people in Western New York.
Mm-hmm. The Buffalo Bills fan base is fairly unique, and one of the things that's been popping around for about a year now is the Buffalo Fan Alliance, and we had Matt Sabuda there, one of their founding members, on earlier in this offseason, right after Mr. Wilson passed away, to talk about the Bills Fan Alliance. Have you been hearing any connections with them and any bidders, and would that even be, welcomed by some of these bidders trying to finance some of this money?
I have not heard about any connections, and I think it goes back to what we were talking about earlier, where as pure, you want your bid to be as pure as it can be, and that's why Golisano wants to go it alone. That's why Terry and Kim Pagula don't want to take on or even discuss things with any minority owners right now. Really, where the Buffalo Fan Alliance would probably help somebody would be the Bon Jovi group. I think in a vacuum. In a vacuum, that's probably that's a group that needs help, and that's I was joking about it with somebody else, and it was only half joking, because I was talking with somebody where Jim Kelly, the group that should want Jim Kelly on their side would be the John Bon Jovi group.
I was just gonna make a joke about like a wrestling face turn where John Bon Jovi was really in cahoots with Jim Kelly all along. We had this right. And they come out, walk on stage together, and like give each other their big hug, and guys, the Bills are staying in Buffalo forever. No, it gets too complicated, and I don't know. But no, I definitely get where you're going from with the Buffalo Fan Alliance and the Bon Jovi group. You're absolutely right.
Jim Kelly has had a hard time latching onto a group, so that should tell you how difficult it would be for the Buffalo Fan Alliance to really help somebody. Mm-hmm. Jim Kelly has some backing out there, and from what I've heard, has a few $100 million of partners or people who've pledged to help out over the years, and he can bring that team to a group. But even he has had trouble latching onto a group, because I think, and with that non-disclosure agreement and with the wishes of the NFL and with Morgan Stanley, the more pure your group is, or if you're a single entity, then that really makes you stronger in this process.
What about the Jacobs family? Are they still kind of in the periphery of this conversation?
They are, but only from a stadium standpoint. They are not going to get involved, and it's not a lot of it was made of Jeremy Jacobs not wanting to sell the Bruins, but really the more significant issue is that their business interests are so intertwined with gambling and with they have so many gambling related business enterprises, and it would be virtually impossible for them to extricate themselves from the gambling industry to move forward. They looked into it, they were interested, they wanted to do it, and it just became too taxing for Delaware North to be able to pull it off. So that's why they decided to leave the Bills purchase type of so they couldn't be a solution there, so that's why they're focusing more on a stadium if it comes to that.
And I think that's also where the Buffalo Fan Alliance can really come into play as an after the fact funding source for someone who would want to build a stadium at 0% interest.
Yeah.
Jason Pieri asks, does Pegula's ability to fund the team outright put him in the lead? Is that really his biggest advantage?
Yeah, it's an advantage. I don't know if that's his biggest. Let's not sell him short of the fact that he is stability for Western New York, and the NFL doesn't want to have to leave here. But yes, obviously his money is huge. He's the perfect candidate in so many different regards. That's why he's the preferred bidder on this from the NFL standpoint, because he has the money. He has the wherewithal to keep the team in Western New York. They don't want their teams to move, so they would be good for generations. Terry Pegula spoke when he bought the Buffalo Sabres that he has these things to give to his kids someday. So you're talking about generational type ownership, unless his feelings change on that. But you have that local tie. You have money, raw cash. He, as he said in his news release last week when that sale was consummated for the $1.75 billion in oil reserve lands in West Virginia and Ohio, hey folks, I got more of this if I need it. We got a ton more of it. That was a shot across the bow. And then you have the political aspect of it. Everybody, Governor Cuomo and Governor Schumer or Senator Schumer want Terry Pegula. And they are influential, and the NFL is based in New York City, and they need as much political juice as they can get for various reasons, and I've talked about it before. The concussion litigation,
the antitrust.
Their antitrust protections, the blackouts, the fact that the NFL is a nonprofit organization, if you can believe that. So if the Bills were to move, you would have Governor Cuomo, who has presidential aspirations. Who knows? Maybe someday he's vice president or even in the White House someday, or has some influential role in the cabinet. You have one of the most dynamic U.S. senators all of a sudden deciding, you know what? I think it's time for us to have some hearings about the FCC and the blackout rules, or antitrust when it comes to collective bargaining agreement, or when there's the next work stoppage, or this nonprofit status that the NFL has. The NFL, the Buffalo Bills are the only team that play in in the state of New York, and so that's actually a big bargaining chip for Bills fans. I know we got a little bit off subject there, but I think that is part of why Pegula plays into this as almost the perfect candidate, and it's not just because of the money, but the money sure does help.
So ultimately, speaking of the money, DeBills asked, what do you think the number is ultimately going to be?
Oh, I have a prediction on this. I don't know what the number is going to be. I've talked to some people who have educated guesses on this, and my number, and this is just gut feeling, if we're making a prediction, I think the right number might be somewhere around $1.4 billion. I think that Terry Pegula can afford that, but here's where the number may slide backwards. Everything's fallen apart. There really is no competition. Donald Trump and and Tom Golisano are straw men almost in this situation. They're really not to be taken seriously. So really it becomes how much can this Bon Jovi group be propped up, or these mystery bidders, if they really exist, or maybe somebody can be cajoled into getting involved, which I think is entirely possible, or else I wouldn't have been reporting about it over the last week. I think that there is a chance for somebody to get in this late, or somebody that we haven't heard of yet. But I think that I had it at about 1-4 going into this. I think that this team is going to set a record, which would be 1.1 billion, what the Dolphins went for in 2009. But with the way things have been going, and with the way Morgan Stanley and the trust have had trouble generating interest, maybe they only go for $1 billion. But I think that regardless, Bills fans should hope the team sells for a lot, because that means Terry Pagula probably gets him.
Nice.
And he's probably going to get him anyway. But he's really the only one that can, go way up there.
What about the timeline? Since the beginning of this whole process, 2 dates have been thrown out specifically. The first one being the owners' meeting in October. Do you think something gets done before that, where the owners can actually vote on a new member?
That's what they're hoping for. I think that that's really what they're shooting for. But as they try to continue to get this additional interest, who knows? Maybe that slows the process down a little bit. But these meetings that have been taking place last week, this week, next week, that is with the October deadline, or the October meeting in mind. Now, this is something that, just to keep in mind, a little bit of inside baseball. That meeting takes place October 7th or 8th or 9th, somewhere in that range in New York City. But I'm told that to get on the agenda for that meeting, you can't just phone up the NFL and say, okay, we're ready to vote on the Bills, put it on the agenda. It needs to be vetted by the Finance Committee, and those meetings take place in September. So there is something is going to have to be done in advance of these committee meetings. When there's these committee meetings take place in September, and what they do is they organize what's going to be on the agenda for the owners in October. So they need to at least go through it and take a look at all the different things and the different specifics regarding what they will vote on in October. So it's not like they have up until October 1st or 5th to do it. They need to have it done here probably within the next month.
We're with Tim Graham from the Buffalo News. That's a very interesting timeline, and they have been pushing it pretty quickly, I would think, since those non-binding bids were due, even though that deadline was kind of farcical. Boston JL, speaking of your reporting for the Buffalo News, asked, how has this story been unique kind of for you as a reporter? It seems like from an outsider's perspective, it's incredibly time-consuming. Tim's only been to one camp practice, and he attended the Hall of Fame game. Did you go to Carolina?
I didn't. Mark Gahn went to Carolina. I will be covering the game in Pittsburgh. I'm going to the practices, the joint practices in Latrobe. But I'm going with Jay Skursky. I'm going to be down there hopefully covering some practice. But the reason Jay's going is because there's a good chance I might be stuck in my hotel room in Latrobe. So yeah, it has been time consuming. It has been incredible. I've covered something close to this. I've covered a lot of business with the Sabres. I covered a team going into bankruptcy. I was covering that team when John Regas was arrested. I covered the sale of that team, but it was totally different. And it was, that was a circus, and we had all hands on deck covering that. There was Bucky Gleason and me covered that. Bucky Gleason and I should say, covered that. And I want to say who else was on the staff helping out, but there were multiple reporters doing that, and it was almost like each of us had a handle on one group. Bucky was more involved with the Golisano group, whereas I was more involved in the Sherry Bassin group, if you remember those guys, and the Mark Hamster group, which actually was given. There was a belief that he had bought the team, and then he turns out that his money man didn't have the money. You almost had a repeat of the Riga situation. But that was different. That was almost This has been one of those situations where I feel like I have a pulse on all the groups that are involved, with the trust, with One Bills Drive, with the NFL. I feel like I'm about as plugged in as you can be, and it's been fun to cover. And it's been It's been fascinating, and I hate to say this because people are going to maybe get upset with me, or beg me. There are a lot of things I know that I haven't been able to report yet, because information is a commodity, and I'm in the information brokerage business, and there are some things that I need to have some information to leverage to get other information. It's been fascinating. It's a hell of a lot different than going out to practice and watching who's playing nickel linebacker. So it's I'm dealing with people who do this, who buy and sell billion-dollar businesses for a living, as opposed to people who wear visors and have clipboards.
Right. Yeah, that would seems to touch different. Speaking of some of those guys, do you think it might be difficult for, say, Donald Trump or Tom Golisano to get state funding for a stadium should that happen? That's one of our questions from our comment section.
Well, it depends. It depends on the mood of the governor and the senator. And here's the thing that's been weird. If you've been following this from the beginning, if you go back to when the lease was signed, when Ralph Wilson was still alive, Mark Poloncarz said that he wanted to have a downtown stadium. He would like to have a stadium built downtown. Ralph Wilson died, and there was talk about the new ownership right away. And Roger Goodell was talking about finding a permanent solution for the team in a place to play, and it was the NFL's wish to have a new stadium. And so you had the different politicians saying, yep, new stadium. And then sometime around June, all of a sudden, Governor Cuomo said, we don't need a new stadium. Ralph Wilson Stadium's just fine. And then all of a sudden you heard Senator Schumer, maybe a couple days later, say, you know what? Ralph Wilson Stadium's just fine. And then you heard Mark Poloncarz say, Ralph Wilson Stadium's just fine. Everybody got on the same page. So in the beginning, I would say, yes, it would be a little easier to get state funding for a stadium. Then you went through that phase where it's like, boy, these guys aren't going to be giving up anything for a new stadium. They've sunk there's a $160 million renovation going on right now. They know this. And now, all of a sudden, Roger Goodell comes out, and this is the story that was in the Buffalo News a couple of days ago, and now Cuomo and Schumer are saying, well, maybe there could be, let's worry about that when the time comes. So, but here's my thinking on a new stadium. I come from a state, Ohio, in which every major sports team has not only a brand new stadium, but its own stadium. I grew up, the Cleveland Browns and the Cleveland Indians played in the same stadium. Now the Cleveland Indians have their own stadium, the Browns have their own stadium, the Cavs have their own arena downtown. The Cincinnati Reds and the Cincinnati Bengals used to play in the same stadium. They each have their own new stadium. So you have a state like Ohio and these are all paid for by taxpayers in some way, shape, or form. And the state of New York can probably sell a new stadium because they haven't had to build any. Because the Jets and the Giants play in New Jersey, and the Yankees were pretty much built by themselves, and the Mets, and yes, there were some interest-free bonds involved, but really not taxpayer funded. So really, the Bills Stadium, they could probably sell that as, hey, look, we haven't had to do this. We've been lucky. Other states have been raked over the coals regarding funding for stadiums. This is an important part of the fabric of Western New York. We have to help build a stadium. I think it would be a lot easier sell than in probably 49 other states.
I also think that the amount of money that the Bills bring in on income tax alone that they couldn't replicate with other, financing projects. Yet the economic advantages aside, people like to debate and say, well, I spend more money because the Bills are here, and that's just plain old not true. But the income tax that the Bills provide for the state that they couldn't replicate through other means, I think is a huge deal. I think the number is something like $12 million off the top of my head that would just be gone if those jobs were gone, because those guys would go work somewhere else, playing for another NFL team. So yeah, I think that's right. It's a big part of the conversation too with the politics. We've been talking with Tim Graham of the Buffalo News about the Bills sale process, and if you want to talk to him about that, you can find him on Twitter at @bytimgraham. But we did have some other questions for you. Do you write?
Should I be nervous right now?
Well, here's one from Zen.
Sounds like we're going off the.
We're off the bids now.
That's why we're off the play card right now.
That's totally why I transitioned.
That's fine. Let's do it.
Do you write the troll responses before your articles or your articles before the troll responses? That's from Zen.
I don't know if I get the question.
Do you, when you write an article before you publish it, do you also write the responses you're going to give to the trolls when they troll you?
Oh, no, those are all done for my own amusement. Usually if something pops into my head as a good response, that's when I respond.
That's good. What was your favorite Twitter exchange with an angry fan? That comes from Dan Lavoie.
Oh, there have been so many of them. I usually don't remember them very long because I have so many of them. But I do it. A lot of people say I get, on a related topic. I don't think I'll be able to answer that question. But the Dante Whitner one, which was recent, I really enjoyed that.
Oh my God.
That wasn't a fan. That was a little different. But I will say this. A lot of people say, why do you bother responding to people when they're so negative? And I don't think that people understand that I enjoy it. I'm doing it for my own amusement. I'm not sitting there angrily, like typing away and like, you sons of bitches, I'm going to get you. No, I'm sitting there laughing as I do it. I think it's hilarious. And so I think I'm more prone to respond to somebody who takes a shot at me than somebody who says I did great work. Although I've started doing the other, I will respond directly, or I'll do a direct reply to somebody when they're nice to me. But if somebody wants to be a jerk about it, then when I'm having fun, I want to share my fun with everybody. And I know that there's a large segment of my followers who don't like it when I do that. But there's an even larger segment of my followers who get a kick out of it. So that's why I keep doing it.
I think I knew that I had, quote, made it as a Buffalo Bills blogger, for whatever that phrase means, when I started to get like some trolls that would tweet me. I don't say a lot of stuff that warrants trolling, and I don't invite it like you do. That's not a dig at you. You could certainly have your fun the way you want, but I knew I had made it when I got my first troll. Like, hey, thanks, buddy. I'm glad. So
it is a sign that you've made it.
Yeah,
big
sure.
timer.
Yeah, big time. Ron from New Mexico, and I think I know your answer to this. What do you think of, and this is his words, so I'm going to ask it the way he asked, what do you think of your profession's inability to find out what is going on with Cordy Glenn's health?
Well, it's not well, maybe it is an inability, but I think at some point there's a respect involved, and once somebody says it's a personal matter and that it's an illness, I think that out of respect we don't go prying. And there's really only so much we can do. You can get the information from the Bills, and obviously they weren't going to talk. You could get the information from Cordy Glenn, and he wasn't talking, or you can approach the agent. And really beyond that, you're really out of options as what to do. Now, I got I was fortunate enough when I was covering Joe Macy, the boxer, to be able to obtain his medical records, brain scans, things like that. That's not something that I can readily do. I don't have sources that can break into a doctor's file cabinet and tell me what's going on with Cordy Glenn. So at some point, I didn't feel, I would love to have been able to tell readers what his condition is, because it affects the team, and it was, affecting, regardless of how personal it was, there was a football impact. Mm-hmm. So I would love to have been able to get that scoop, and I would love, it still would be a scoop to find out what it is. I was thrilled just to be able to report a couple of weeks ago that it wasn't serious and that he was expected to be back during the preseason and is expected to play in the season opener. But no, there was no frustration. I think that once you're not going to get it, then you move on and concentrate on something else.
Right. A different question from Buddy Holly.
No kidding.
Different. He spells it 1-3 Uddy Holly, which is weird. Anyway.
That's not him. That's not the real Buddy Holly. He wouldn't do that.
I don't think he would either. And it's about the ESPN AFC East blog. Why is it so hard for them to find people that are willing, he says know anything about the Bills. I don't know if that's necessarily true. I think Mike Rodak has done a very nice job covering the team as a beat reporter, and I don't want you to talk about like personal things with these guys or anything like that. But what makes that job unique, and what makes it difficult to fill? Without doing anything that you'll regret tomorrow morning.
I think it's difficult. I don't think it would be a difficult job to fill for ESPN. I'm sure that I know that they had a ton of interest in it, but I also know that when those jobs were first created, when they did the 8 divisional bloggers back when I first joined, that was a job that a lot of people wanted. But then we were all on 3-year contracts. And I think that word got out that it wasn't everything that it was cracked up to be, and it wasn't that working for ESPN, isn't glamorous, and it's it was a lot of hard work, a ton. It was a grind, and I don't think I'll ever do anything that was as difficult as that job. I think a lot of people view blogging as less than an important form of journalism, but that was not. That was not an afterthought type job, and it was grueling. And I think that Matt Mosley, who was the NFC East guy, left. I left as the AFC East guy. I left. Matt left for a Fox job, writing for Fox Sports. I left to return to newspapers, and I think a lot of people looked at it and said, "Whoa, it's." If people are leaving to go back to newspapers, what's the problem here? And I think the word had gotten out that it just wasn't all that. So you're dealing with then interviewing people who are then getting into the business as entry level or fresh out of college or have very little NFL experience, and the pay maybe isn't as what you think it would be. I was paid well. And I'm not, gonna. I'll readily admit that I left I left a great job covering the Miami Dolphins for the Palm Beach Post to go work for ESPN. But when they went to the individual, they're all 32 teams. The price obviously went down quite a bit. So I think that played a part into it too. Mike Rodak, I think, is a very talented journalist. He does get a bad shake because he's not from here. I was viewed much the same way when I went to go cover the Miami Dolphins, and maybe he doesn't know a lot of the tradition because he's not from Western New York, but neither am I, and I was able to absorb it eventually. So, I think that Mike is a conscientious reporter, an aggressive reporter. He writes a lot of good things. So I'll defend Mike Rodak all day. Maybe not James Walker, but I'll defend Mike Rodak all day.
Yeah, I'm definitely in the same boat with you on that. And so, Jason Pierre, the other thing about when you were covering AFC East is that you were covering 4 different beats at the same time. And so, to your afterthought point, which team's the afterthought? If you have to cover all 4 teams with kind of equal time, at least Rodak gets to set up shop in Buffalo.
And the thing with me, where I think that if it was a different reporter, Buffalo would be the afterthought because it didn't get the traffic, and that's just the way it was. I mean, the Jets got big traffic, the Patriots got big traffic, the Dolphins got big traffic. The Bills were way down compared to those 3, but those were major metropolitan areas. So I think if you're James Walker or whomever, you may look at it and say, well, why am I going to waste my time with the Bills? It's counterproductive to my energy. But the Bills were important to me because I live there. Mm-hmm. And I knew that when I went to the bar, I would run into somebody who knew what I did for a living, and I would want that guy to say, hey, Tim, I enjoy what you do. I like your coverage of the Bills. And, my family and, my in-laws and, I wanted to beat the Buffalo News on stories because those were my colleagues and my competitors, from a friendly standpoint. I wanted to be able to beat Alan Wilson and Mark Gaughan on stories. So I think maybe that's why the Bills fans remember me better as for the AFC East stuff because I really I gave just as much energy to that as I did to the New York Jets.
And of course, what's working at the Buffalo News like now that you've had those experiences both at Palm Beach Post and ESPN since you left?
Well, I couldn't wait to get back to the Buffalo News. It was, and that's not an ESPN criticism either. It was, I guess I didn't know how good I had it. And the Buffalo News is a fantastic place to work. Of course, I was covering hockey then. I came back when I left ESPN. I was doing investigative reporting on news side, and that was an incredibly fun year. It was super entertaining, and to be able to write those big takeout stories. But when Alan Wilson died, we had a need for me to go back to sports and to cover the Bills. So, and his widow, Lisa Wilson, is our sports editor, and so it was it was an emotional decision for me, or at least it was. It was a decision that it wasn't like, hey, sorry, Lisa, I'm going to stay over here and I'm going to stay on news side. I knew that they needed me, and it feels good to be needed too. I'm not going to lie, and to be able to go there and work with Mark Gaughan and Jay Skursky and Jerry Sullivan, and it's a great group, and I don't regret coming back. That's for sure.
Well, and one of the interesting kind of wrinkles in this whole Buffalo Bills sale process, to kind of bring us back full circle, is that you are kind of reporting outside of the sports world right now. You're in business. You're doing, breaking news stories and things like that.
True.
So that's really cool. Well, we've been talking with Tim Graham of the Buffalo News tonight. He's been breaking a bunch of stories around the Buffalo Bills bidding process. Say that 5 times fast. And he took some time away from his phone tonight to join us. So we'd like to thank him profusely, and we'll definitely have you on at some point in the future, Tim.
Hey, I love it, and just for your, I'll sit here and do this for 3 hours, but I know there are time constraints to doing this. So but I enjoy it, and I think this is a fantastic format. So whenever you want to have me back, let's do it again.
All right. Well, at 11 o'clock tonight, we'll be back with. No, I'm just kidding.
I'll be here if you want me to.
All right. Well, thanks a lot, and have a great one.
All right. You too, Matt.